Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have signs you are an IP. And so this is the INFP, INTP, ISTP, and ISFP types.
Okay, so as we move from IJ into IP, a couple of things to keep in mind is obviously both are introverted types. They both have a commonality in that being introverted, they both really do want to be prepared before they engage in the outer world. So that can be a point of confusion between the types at times.
I totally agree. As introverts, IPs will still be skeptical of the outer world and it won't be their most natural mode of operation. And so they will have a degree of preparation that can look like the IJ types. And so we're here today to differentiate these types a little bit more.
So our first point that you are an IP is you have a very strong sense of self and your own identity is clearly defined. So when it comes to having a dominant function of TI or FI, both of these are introverted judging functions. And so both have very clearly defined identities, either based on logic and what they believe to be true based on their own inner logic system, or based on feelings and values, and those values being very unique to the individual. So personal convictions are very obvious to you, and you can find yourself even wondering how the rest of the world can be so blind in this area. It doesn't always mean that you have a clear direction or know which action to take, but at least you do understand your truth or your values quite well.
And so yes, IPs have a need for logical or harmony congruence within themselves. They want that side of themselves to feel fully settled. They want to be able to know those parts of themselves. However, that may not always be possible. And so you'll find two kinds of IPs, or two sides of them in different situations. One side of them can be sure of their convictions and who they are or what they believe in. And then the other side of them is being very unsure and very uncertain about what they believe in because they're not given enough information to make a choice. An example of this is an INFP or an ISFP, an FI dominant type, who is unsure about what to feel about a certain thing until they actually go through it. So until they have enough information, they don't want to make a premature emotional statement. Because what if they get to that moment in time and they're feeling something completely differently? They don't want to overly commit to how they're going to respond right now if they're not sure and they haven't experienced it yet. And so you'll have them oscillate between, if it doesn't resonate, they can be in a waffly state. They can be unsure of how to feel about something. And so as an FI dominant type, there are some topics that you might waffle between because you might not know how you feel about it yet. And so it's this interesting paradox of FI dominants being super sure of their emotions on certain topics and then super unsure in other topics. And this is the same thing for TI dominant types, INTPs and ISTPs. For some topics, they may not know their opinion on it. They may say that they have no opinion on it. They just know what's false about it. And for other topics, they might actually be very locked in onto their opinion too. And so with an IP type, on the surface, they appear very casual and easygoing. But once you step on a value, or if you don't make sense to them and it's not gelling with their inner understanding, you may hit a wall with them. And they may be very locked into their stance and unmoving. And it's very surprising because they go from chill to knocking your sails off a little bit through a stubbornness, a rigidity. So the second sign that you are an IP is that you have a surprisingly spontaneous side to you.
Yes, IPs tend to spend a lot of time in their inner world being introverts. So organizing, they're spending that time organizing what they believe to be true or what they feel is authentic. But when they do get the push or the inner desire to engage in the world outside of themselves, they can be very much in the moment and spontaneous in their actions. The third point is that you are naturally self-referencing when it comes to decisions. So this can sometimes lead to frustration with understanding how others make decisions. Extroverted judging functions naturally take a group average approach when making decisions. So when you're using an introverted judging function as your dominant function, decisions are very naturally individual and based on what makes the most logical sense using TI or what makes the most sense based on inner values using FI. So you could understand how an extroverted judger makes decisions quite well, but you just might not like it or agree with it.
Well said, Diane. And so as mentioned, IPs can be very self-referencing in their speech. With an FI dominant type, like an ISFP or INFP, you'll notice with some of them, as they're talking, they're describing their inner world and how things are impacting them, how things are making them feel, and their likes or dislikes. You might hear a visceral reaction to certain things, their visceral preferences towards certain things. Like, oh, I hate that movie. Or like but it's in whiffs. Like they won't tell you directly, but you'll get it in these little FI whiffs. And so you'll hear in some FI users a very self-referencing speech in them referring back to themselves as they're analyzing information. Like, am I a good or bad person? And relating things back to themselves. Not in a self-centered way. It's more in a self-referencing way because they want to compare everything back to how does this resonate with me? Or how is this impacting me internally, my value system? There are a lot of IPs who pause between their sentences because they're looking so internally. Like with INTPs, you'll see that they pause in between their sentences a lot because they're trying to get the words just accurately, just right, because they want congruence with their words and how they make sense of things. And so they're going to be careful with how they phrase their sentence. And with ISFPs, you might notice them pausing between their sentences because they're checking internally to see if things resonate with them. And so you'll notice that slight introverted judging check-in that they do. And then they're just describing their internal world to you sometimes, which is a huge IP sign. And so the fourth point is you find yourself spending more time in your own inner reality. Now, the tertiary function of the INFP and INTP is SI. And so they may look to the past at certain times or compare and contrast with their storehouse of concrete information. And with the ISFP and ISTP, you may see them going to their introverted intuition, looking to the future. And it could manifest as worrying over the future or having extreme optimism at certain points and then extreme pessimism at extreme points about the future. It's also important to remember that IPs are also introverts, and so it may not feel like a struggle or feeling stuck to be in their tertiary function. It might just be a place that feels comfortable or to be relished in as well.
And this can be, I think, sometimes a friction point when dealing with an extrovert at times, because extroverts can view this as more of comfort seeking or not getting out and stretching themselves. So I think at times you can see some friction when an extrovert or an introvert are trying to relate to each other. All right. And then our fifth point is an IP often has a strong desire for having outer world impact, but then has a bit of fear around your ability to do so. This can come because of that extroverted judging function being in the inferior position. So with TE inferior, the desire for impact is there. You want to be able to take those inner values and share them with the world and spread them. But how to do that exactly and how to engage a group can be a bit of a struggle. The same with FE inferior. So that desire for shared emotional connection with the group and how to really be involved and be part of a group to have impact can also be a struggle.
Yeah. And so this goes back to our previous video about how IPs have an extreme relationship with how people see them, swinging from unawareness to unbearable sensitivity to outer world feedback. And so IPs are aware of how they see themselves, but they may have a poor sense of how other people view them. When IPs do get fixated on how others see them, it may be more of a negative space for them because it's on the lower part of their cognitive function stack, their FE or TE.
Yes, and I think it can often look extreme. So in the case of TE inferior, being overly aggressive in getting goals met and kind of pushing the group a bit too hard, harder than you would naturally. Or in the case of inferior FE, being easily hurt by other people's actions or fearing that what you do is not going to be received well by the group. And so then holding back and just choosing to not be involved at all for fear of being rejected.
Yeah. So there is that insecurity around that last function. So it causes this push and pull between your self identity and the tribe group feedback. All right. And so thanks, Diane, for coming out today and chatting with me about the IP types. You were able to offer masterful commentary because you have people in your life who are IPs too. And so I'm privileged to have you on today. Thanks, everyone, for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.